Welcome back to the program. You're listening to Business in Vancouver on Roundhouse Radio 98.3. We're the daily business news program from the Business in Vancouver newspaper and BIV.com. I'm Kirk LaPointe.
And I'm Haley Wooden. This segment of Business in Vancouver is brought to you by Dale Carnegie Training. There's a reason why today's Dale Carnegie Training matters. Discover how it can help you reach your goals at bc.dalecarnegie.com. As you know, global commodity prices, they've picked themselves up off the floor, and that has been a good thing for Canada's mining industry. According to PwC Canada, Canadian-based miners saw their aggregate market valuations soar 46% last year. And in addition to that, we're also courting more exploration dollars than any other country. Joining us now for a look at what this means for BC is Bryan Cox. He's the new president and CEO over at the Mining Association of British Columbia. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you today. Yeah.
You inherit the organization at a really nice time.
Well,
you're not like Mr. Doom and Gloom. You've got the cheery part of the
it's an exciting time to be part of the industry for sure. That being said, I've been there for about 3.5 years, so I've been there through the tough times that we've seen over the last few years, and they have been really tough. So,
what is behind the turnaround in a lot of ways? What is it? Just a cyclical thing, Bryan, where what goes down eventually goes up?
It really, in the mining industry, it really is, and there's so many inputs and permutations and combinations to the industry itself that to pinpoint one thing is really difficult. But it is a cyclical industry, and we plan for these cycles. The one over the past few years has been especially difficult on a jurisdiction like British Columbia, where we predominantly mine steelmaking coal and copper, and those two commodities really took a hit over the past few years. So it was a tough time for the industry. We weathered it. We're looking forward to the opportunities that we have moving forward. And there are a number of opportunities, especially when we look at the transition to a lower carbon economy and what mining can provide to that.
When it comes to looking forward and placing your bets on a jurisdiction, I mentioned exploration dollars. Are you seeing a lot of that in BC?
I'm really focusing on trying to get mines, operating and permitted, because that really helps exploration come to the province, because really it's about investors' certainty and investor confidence. And when people feel that you can come to a jurisdiction, make an investment, get a decision at the other end, then it really helps to bolster that investor confidence, which leads to investment across the spectrum in mining. So I think if we're really able to get some permitting done in an efficient way, get some mines back up and operating, that's really going to help the entire industry in BC.
What are the early signs from the Horgan government about its commitment to a sector like this?
Really positive so far. You've seen the mandate letters for the Minister of Energy, Mines, Petroleum Resources, as well as Minister of Environment and other ministers, a commitment to mining. So we're really seeing a commitment to ensuring that we do have that certainty in the province. Can you come to British Columbia, look at making an investment, and get to a decision in a timely manner? Sounds really simple, but in British Columbia, of course, there's lots of inputs into that process. But really, that's what it boils down to for business, is that certainty of being able to get to a decision in a timely manner so that they can deploy that capital that we're looking to get into this province. And in mining, it's significant capital. This is an industry that, in 2016, provided $8.7 billion in GDP to the province of British Columbia, $650 million in direct payments to government. This is a significant foundational industry. We have a really big opportunity to grow on that and to ensure that British Columbia is a leader in Canada and the world.
We saw the 2017 election obviously cause some uncertainty for investors, particularly in energy and the LNG sector. What's the signal we're sending to the broader investment community when it comes to mining now that there's still some uncertainty, but at least we have an election result?
For mining, we're optimistic that we can move forward and get to that investor certainty. In an industry like mining, we're one that obviously our operations are in the more rural parts of British Columbia, but importantly, our supplier jobs are predominantly in the lower mainland. So we have this opportunity in mining to knit that narrative of British Columbia back together to say that actually we're all interconnected. And a strong mining industry means a strong Vancouver, means a strong Burnaby, Surrey, Langley, you name it. And so that's really what we're working really hard at the association to do, is to communicate the fact that this industry really touches all parts of British Columbia and we're all interconnected.
I know that the association has for years worked on this, but I'm not sure the public quite apprehends the fact that the mining industry really has a commitment around best practices, that balance exploration with the environment. Tell me a little bit about what it is that the association is trying to put an emphasis on here in the time ahead to reassure the public that this is not the kind of Donald Trump coal mine image that's out there.
We have an incredibly strong regulatory system in British Columbia, and it's really about communicating that and communicating industry's commitment to going above and beyond that as well. We have an industry that, that we have an opportunity right now. When you look at the transition to electric cars, when you look at the transition to clean energy, it takes 4 times more copper to build an electric motor than it does a combustion engine. It takes 100 tons of steel-making coal to build 1 wind turbine. So that alone provides an amazing opportunity to continue doing what we're doing in British Columbia. But what we need to ensure is that we have that public trust and confidence moving forward. And it's about communicating the system that we have. So when you think about mining, it's a very robust process that starts at the exploration phase and goes all the way through to the reclamation of a mine site. The public really generally only hears and sees about the environmental assessment process, and that gets a lot of news, both federally and provincially. But in an industry like mining, that's almost really the start of the process. After environmental assessment, you move into mine permitting, which continues for the entire life of the project and into reclamation. So what we've worked really hard to do is to communicate that permitting side of the regulatory process. And what we've done is work with the government to actually ensure that all of the inspection reports, the permits, are actually online so that people can go and see them and see that how robust this process is, how many binders of information that proponents and operators are submitting, and how much iterative discussion there is between Indigenous peoples, communities, governments about this industry that's continuous and ongoing. And so that's step one, is really to say, hey, we're doing all of this now. Can we improve upon it? Absolutely. And we want to work with communities and Indigenous peoples and governments to do that.
Is there a lesson that the industry has taken that it believes is going to be applied in the future as a result of the Mount Poly situation, for instance?
I think we've worked really, really hard as an industry to work on the regulatory system, but also talk more about what we do. Mm-hmm. We're an industry that's in the past, I think, stayed fairly quiet. When you compare it to how big an impact we have in the province, economically, jobs-wise. And so it's really incumbent on us to get out and talk more about our industry. But on the regulatory side, what was really important coming out of Mount Poly is that we actually got together with the government. So we had industry, First Nations, labor, and government sit around a table and actually rework the mining code when it comes to tailings in British Columbia. And that was the first time I'm aware of anywhere in British Columbia where you actually had that group of stakeholders around a table making a consensus recommendation to government to improve the already great regulations we have in the province. Those regulations are now in place. Other jurisdictions are following those now. So there's actually a really positive regulatory story and stakeholder engagement story that's come from Mount Poly, and we're looking to build upon that.
We're speaking to Bryan Cox. He's the president and chief executive officer at the Mining Association of B.C. Do you think the general public trusts the process? Sometimes you hear conversations that, it's clearly a rigorous process. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of conversations with stakeholders. Is there a trust issue that maybe needs to be rebuilt?
That is the question, really. And it's a question of, what does the average British Columbian think? And really, they want to know that what's happening on the land base in their province, they can feel good about. Mining's an industry that's been, in this province since before we were even a province. In fact, a lot of the reason that British Columbia is a province is because of mining and the gold rush that we had, and the fact that we needed to organize some system of government to deal with all the people coming in. So the history of mining is so long and vast in the province that, communicating with British Columbians is a nuanced process because there's such a history to it. So when you talk about public trust, people just need to feel that what's happening, they can believe in and feel good about and know that they're world leaders in. And in fact, we are, and we have been. And communicating that, Haley, to your point, is difficult because it's a technical industry. So trying to communicate technical, nuanced processes to the public in a 30-second soundbite is challenging. It really is, especially in this day and age where people have so much information coming at them. That's
why we do 12-minute conversations.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And so much of it is unsourced, the information that people are seeing, and whether it's on social media and other places. And so when we try to vector in and say, well, actually it's this and that, you're playing catch up in a lot of ways. So I think the public trust conversation is really important for governments, because if you're going to inject that into the regulatory process, you really have to know what you're trying to get at before you go into it. If you open up a regulatory process saying, oh, we want to improve public confidence, well, that's trying to throw Jello against a wall, and it's very tough to put that in the parameters of a regulatory system. So that's always our feedback to government and others, is that we really need to be, obviously we're always interested in improving the regulatory system, but what exactly are we trying to improve along that spectrum?
I know that our Vancouver listenership here would, in the main, not be all that aware of the fact that when it goes by these buildings downtown, that they're often occupied by mining companies, that there's a lot of office space in this city occupied by the head offices or the district offices of a lot of these places. How are you working on the relationship with the city? Because I don't think the city has necessarily acknowledged the presence of a large sector like this and its generation of prosperity in the community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kirk, about the impact that mining has in Vancouver proper and the Lower Mainland generally. But we literally have hundreds of mining companies that are headquartered here in British Columbia, and importantly, hundreds of other lawyers, environmental companies, engineering companies, all supporting that industry. So you have a huge footprint in the city of Vancouver and beyond. For us, really, it's about making that connection between what our industry does and how it affects a city like Vancouver. And I think a big piece to that is really broadening the discussion around the technology industry. I think for too long, technology has been talked about like it's some siloed industry that's on its own. It's a service industry that services multiple sectors. And in British Columbia, it services predominantly the natural resource space. Mining is a technology industry. That's what we do. If you step on a mine site, you're going to be wowed at what you see from a tech point of view. So communicating that back to a city like Vancouver and the residents to show that actually we're all tied together, we're all interconnected, we need to have these strong sectors. I think for too often, and maybe it's because we're such a diversified economy, we're viewed that, well, we can do with less of this industry if we have more of this industry. And we almost view it like a zero-sum game rather than growing the entire pie. And that's really our opportunity in BC, is to grow that entire pie and do it because we're so interconnected.
Are there many conversations happening between Vancouver's tech sector and the mining industry?
Absolutely. There's several really important conversations happening right now, especially on the innovation side, the cluster side. So funding that's coming from the federal government as well as the provincial governments to make certain parts of Canada hubs, if you will, towards technology and innovation. Absolutely really important conversations going on amongst the sectors. And you're going to see some pretty exciting things coming forward from the tech sector, the mining sector, and other natural resource sectors to really tile this together and help to communicate to people in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland what we do in BC and be proud of it.
Interesting. Bryan, a pleasure having you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That's Bryan Cox. He's the president and chief executive officer at the Mining Association of British Columbia. You're listening to Business in Vancouver on Roundhouse Radio 98.3. I'm Haley Wooden.
And I'm Kirk LaPointe. Stay with us here at Roundhouse Radio 98.3.